But with that, I would like to come to our second panel, because I think the timing is it was nicely chosen. It wasn't kind of fully predictable, but we got a deal on the CSRD last week in trilogue. And I think we want to kind of draw a bit of conclusions as to what that means on an operational perspective, and also how it links to, right at the beginning of the seminar, to the corporate governance piece. And to do so, we have with us Tom Todd, who's the team leader on sustainability reporting within the Commission's team. Congratulations for getting the deal. I think also Pierre Chabrol, who was actually, in the outgoing French presidency, the chief negotiator, and so well done on that. We already had kind of the MEP, one of the MEPs earlier today. We've got Kristina Church, who's head of responsible strategy, at Bank of New York Mellon. We've got Jimmy Greer, vice president of ESG at Moody's ESG Solutions. We've got Roger Martella. Thank you, by the way, Roger, because Roger's flying in from Washington, so he's up particularly early to be with us, and he's the Chief Sustainability Officer at GE, an important global manufacturing company. And Christian Hell, who's the Ernst & Young partner for climate change and sustainability services. So it's a deliberately quite broad panel, bringing in different perspectives at a very senior level. I think, just to remind the audience, you can ask questions. We get questions in, and we always get very nice compliments in, which is very nice to read, but actually you can ask questions, and please do so. But with that, maybe I pass over to you, Tom, first, to set a little bit the scene as to where you see this, the negotiations from the Commission's perspective, and how it fits into the broader corporate reporting and sustainable finance agenda. Thanks for being with us, Tom.
Thank you, Nickolas. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Indeed, the Parliament and the Member States, the Council, reached an agreement on a provisional final text for the CSRD, in fact, 10 days ago now. Let me try and summarise how we read that in terms of standards development, which is, I think, the focus of our discussions today, although in truth, the final text, of course, covers more than just the standards issue. Essentially, we do now have confirmation of the political choice of the EU to develop and have mandatory European sustainability reporting standards. And therefore, and I think it's important to say this, not to go down the route that we have taken for international financial reporting standards of explicitly endorsing what comes from the IFRS Foundation and the IASB. The standards will be developed in their draft form by EFRAG, which I think, as many of you know, has undergone quite a substantial change in its governance arrangements and memberships over the last 6 months and year. And the standards would then be adopted as what we call delegated acts. So if you like, secondary pieces of legislation by the European Commission, by the institution that I work for. We have confirmation that those standards and the overall reporting requirements in the EU will indeed build upon our existing reporting requirements that imply double materiality, so both risks to the company and impacts of the company, and that these standards will have to cover the full range of sustainability issues. Now, perhaps important to dig in a little bit more about what the final text says about the relationship between mandatory European sustainability reporting standards and global standards, and in particular those standards that are being developed by the ISSB. I think it's fair to say and important to point out that the final text is a compromise. It is balanced. That is good. That is, if I can say so, a typically European way of doing things. And I think it's, broadly speaking, the kind of outcome that we would have expected. So the text says that European reporting standards must take account of, to the maximum extent possible, of a number of different things. And in fact, there's quite a long list, and that list includes a number of precise pieces of European legislation, as you would expect, including, for instance, the European climate law, including the taxonomy, including the sustainable finance disclosure regulation, and other pieces of legislation. And also on this list are generic references to international standard setting initiatives and indeed to other internationally agreed instruments in the fields of responsible business conduct and so on and so forth. There is, and I think this is particularly useful, there is what we call a recital in the text, so it's not an active legal provision, but it is a part of the introductory text that probably best sums up the approach that our legislators, our co-legislators, are looking for with regard to the ISSB, which says that European standards ought to integrate the content of ISSB standards to the extent that that content is consistent with Europe's legal framework on the one hand, and the ambitions, the political ambitions essentially of the European Green Deal on the other hand. Now, of course, it will be up to EFRAG in the first place to work out how to implement that and how to steer down this path. Marty was referring to, and I want to highlight this, the jurisdictional working group that the ISSB has established. That is something that we very much appreciate. It's been a big ask from the EU for quite some time. And we're very pleased that the ISSB has taken the step of establishing that working group. And in parallel and almost equally important are the technical level discussions that are advancing between EFRAG and ourselves in the European Commission and the ISSB. So work is progressing positively on that front. Nickolas, maybe I'll stop there to leave time for other speakers or any questions you may want to fire at me.
Yeah, I will fire a few questions at you, but maybe after we've heard the others. And I appreciate you focusing very much on the international dimension, as you say, which has been raising certain issues. And we certainly come back to scope as well. I mean, geographical scope, because some of this is potentially extraterritorial. But I mean, Pierre, I would like to pass over to you equally, kind of your impressions from the negotiations, how you see it was a very important priority for the French presidency. Maybe over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for your invitation. It is an honor for me to speak about CSRD, because we are really, I mean, on the French government side, very happy to have achieved a deal on CSRD under our presidency. It was achieving this deal was one of the most important goals we had during our presidencies, among many others, to be honest. But we should not underestimate what we achieved in a very short period of time. And I'm very grateful to the members of Parliament and the EU Commission, because they engaged in this they were very committed in very hard work we had for the past 3 months, because we achieved the deal in these 3 months. But we all shared the view that it was a matter of emergency, that we have to act swiftly and to move very fast on this very important issue. So now we can consider that when it comes to sustainable finance, the European Union has the appropriate tools to provide with a very consistent and very solid framework. We have the taxonomy. It is not completely finished, but we have this dictionary of sustainable activities, and now we have CSRD, which will provide with the information that investors have been requesting for many years, and information that are necessary to achieve not only a solid framework for sustainable finance, but to build confidence for investors to invest in EU companies, to have this transparency that will build up confidence and that will allow us to achieve our goals when it comes to the Green Deal objectives, Fit for 55, and all many other goals the European Union set on climate change policy, among others. So now we have to move fast on the standards. I know it is a very huge task, but again, I want to take advantage of this conference to invite stakeholders to respond to the consultations of ISSB and EFRAG, so has the standard setters be in a position to make their work properly based on these consultations and on the many advices we can get from everybody involved, and we will be actually a lot of us will be involved in this process. Maybe to get back very quickly on the last stages of the negotiation we had within the trilogue with EU Parliament and EU Commission. I think it is, as Tom said, it is like every other kind of EU negotiations. We achieve deals which might be sometimes complicated to read because it is a compromise and it is how the EU is functioning. But I wanted to stress maybe 2 or 3 issues where we had rather complicated discussion, but where we managed to find a path and to land on very satisfactory solutions. I mean, first maybe on the scope of companies that will have to report in the framework of CSRD. We have included the listed SMEs. It was quite a discussion between Parliament and Council, but Council wanted to ensure that SMEs, listed SMEs, will have to report so as they are in the scope of investors, because we do think that it is now a question that every investor is asking, is to have this information. So it was important to have them into the scope. It is also true for non-EU companies which are into the scope, which fall into the scope of the reporting obligations. It was also very important to have them into the scope with, of course, turnover conditions within the EU. But if we want to achieve our environmental goals and our goals when it comes to sustainability, we have to have into the scope all parties involved, with inclusion of non-EU companies. Then we landed on a satisfactory solution on audit. You know, audit was one of the most hotly debated issues at the trilogue, because EU Parliament wanted to have a mandatory audit split. We did not have that in the end in in the CSRD, but I think we strengthened the conditions of the audit to ensure that auditing of the sustainability reporting would be robust and made in the right conditions. And third, maybe we also precise the language, as mentioned by Tom, on the appropriate articulation between international standards and European standards. And on all these issues, the scope, the way these reporting will be audited, the articulation with international standards, I think we managed to get a good outcome. So that was my introductory remarks, but happy to answer any question on the negotiation and on the outcome we achieved.
No, thank you, and remind everybody again that you should ask questions on the chat if you have any on that. But I think you highlighted a few of the very important points there, Pierre, that we will come back to. And I think maybe I pass over initially to Christian, because Christian, you're involved in developing, integrated reporting frameworks, advising clients on that between financial and non-financial reporting. You see some of the challenges around the methodology of making that work within the governance structure of companies. And so I'd be interested in your views, and then Roger, I'll bring you in, because you're facing it, so to speak, in concrete terms within the global company. But maybe Christian first.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, and hello to everybody in the audience. I'm very glad to take the more practitioner view in this panel. And what we basically observe is two sorts of realities. The one is we really see an unprecedented pace and complexity in ESG regulation pouring down both in Europe and on an international level. For me, myself, who's involved in standard setting for the past 14 years, has written these standards and does not do anything else than sustainability advice and reporting. It's overwhelming, and it's, to be honest, quite tough to understand all what's going on already. And I observed that also in discussions and projects with the real leaders in sustainability reporting, who have 20 plus years experience in the field. And at the same time, I see newcomers, so companies being being forced to report for the first time, really having lots of question marks and being overwhelmed by the information and just scratch on the surface to understand what the CSRD is about. However, do not know where the music plays, and that's in my view the SRES and the taxonomy and also the CSDD, especially when we talk about governance. We've started with some gap assessment projects, and we see the mature leading reporters having between 50 and 60% of the information already on hand. So the gap is around about 40%, just ballpark figures. When you talk with SMEs who started very core GRI reporting, the gap is up to 80%. So it's really much work to do. And I do not stop here, but make a second point. And the second point is the second reality. And the second reality, in my view, is that this whole ESG is related to compliance. And at the same time, it goes far beyond. And it goes far beyond because but you can frame the normative power of the factual, meaning that with these initiatives, new information will be published and various users will start using this information and making decisions on that. So the normative power of the factual basically comes back to the idea that without proper ESG reporting and management, you won't get money, you won't get customers, you won't get employees in a very short time frame. The second point why this whole goes beyond compliance is, to me, what is in the taxonomy, what is in the SRES, is kind of a blueprint of the sustainably transformed business model. And you see that in various criteria, and you especially see it in the way how they describe how sustainability becomes integrated. And that's also the case for integration, rather than building a complete new silo next to what you have already. So it's really about understanding value drivers for the whole business, that have a sustainability color, integrating it with strategic planning, rethinking steering models. What are KPIs? What are targets? However, also how do you get the flavor of sustainability in your corporate decision-making processes? For CapEx, for decisions, how do you do that on a multidimensional level? How does a target operating model for the organization look like? And what can you learn from existing processes, and what do you need to adapt? Up to governance, which amendments will you need in board governance, and what does this mean for the competencies, skills, and composition of your board? What does it mean to your remuneration scheme? What does it mean also to your governance systems? So they ask about integrating ESG and risk management, having internal control system, and so on and so on. So there's many interesting questions out there. Getting the answers will be key of the next 5 years in making the transition that was so often mentioned today really happen, and make it happen the sooner is better than later. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Christian, because you picked up on the theme that an interesting comment that was made in the last panel, which is that effective ESG management and planning is a good proxy for good risk management in companies. And that actually one of the positive spillovers from this whole agenda might be that it kind of gives information on just how robust the governance structures and risk management structures are in certain companies across the board beyond ESG. But with that, I mean, Roger, listening to this, and I know you kind of brought together a lot of your colleagues to actually think about this over the next 2 days within GE. How do you see it? And given your global company, you're facing obligations under the SEC, you're facing obligations under all these different jurisdictions. How are you handling that? And how do you see Europe within that framework? How important is the work in Europe for GE within that global context?
Nick, thank you for including me in this conversation. I'm learning a lot and appreciate hearing from the other speakers, and it's an honor to be here. And so GE is a company in 175 countries. We have 168,000 employees. We're focused on solving 3 of the world's biggest sustainability challenges: the energy transition, where we want to decarbonize the energy sector while growing access to affordable, reliable, sustainable electricity. Our equipment powers 1/3 of the world's energy. The future of sustainable aviation, 3 out of every 4 planes use GE engines, and we have an ambition to be net zero for our jet engines by 2050, as we do for the energy sector. And healthcare, half the world's population is underserved by access to healthcare, and so we want to address that access and make our equipment more portable, more accessible, use artificial intelligence so we can reach those folks. So as we're doing that, we focus very much on the impacts we're having to our people, to the planet, and to our communities along the way, which is classic ESG, while we're trying to address 3 of these world's problems. So I have a bit of a saying here. You've probably, Nick, I think you've heard me say it, and the board's heard me say it, our leaders have heard me say it, everybody's heard me say it, is that even though we're a US headquartered company, we're headquartered in Boston, which is where I am today, we have to think like a European company when it comes to ESG, and we have to put ourselves in a European mindset for a number of reasons. We know the EU leads on these issues, both from a regulatory standpoint and from kind of a social acceptance standpoint, and in terms of our customers and our peers and our competitors, anything that touches the EU is leading here. And so we work very hard, and it's one of the reasons we work with you is while the US is important, let me be clear, that's our headquarters, we're paying close attention to the SEC, we will comply with the SEC, we'll comply with anything anywhere in the world people ask us to do, and work to influence in a practical way. We know the EU is far in the lead on these issues, and so we have to judge our efforts, our compliance, as if we were a Brussels-based company or an EU-based company. So we take that very seriously, and that's kind of the guidepost by which we judge ourselves. So we're working to, both prepare for compliance and participate in the system in the EU through EFRAG and others as much as we would if we were an EU headquartered company. So this is something I repeat a lot. As Nick mentioned, we're having a meeting here in Boston today and tomorrow where we're flying folks in from all around the world, including Brussels and parts of Europe, and that's going to be a key theme of our discussion. We're working to build 3 businesses that are focused on those 3 challenges that I mentioned, with sustainability at their core, and we want to make sure that this EU-focused mindset is at the center of how we build those businesses. Having said that, while we will comply with anything people ask us to do, we certainly see both burdens and challenges with multiple systems that are competing, sometimes inconsistent, frequently overlapping. From a burden standpoint, being in the countries where we are for a global company, it takes a lot of resources to comply with multiple systems. And while we'll do that, we would prefer a more streamlined approach. We think that's the better way to go for everybody, more unification among, different global systems. But even more than that, you could argue, okay, well, it's a burden. We put resources towards lots of things. It's a fair point. But there's also this point of how do you actually want to use this information, and how's the average person? I always think of my 15-year-old daughter. She's very interested in these issues. What is she going to glean from this data? And frankly, it's more confusing to her. It's more confusing to me, let alone her, if we have to, provide. If different people are producing different types of information, it's hard to compare one to the other. And we really think it's a disservice to have,